Hello. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of speaking with the British composer Matthew Sheeran. Matthew studied composition at the Guildhall School in London and is also a classically trained violinist. We talked about his transition away from traditional composition and towards the commercial music world, and his work scoring and arranging for films. I asked Matthew what the popular and classical music worlds can learn from each other. We also discussed Matthew's profound interest in microtonal music. In particular, he has recently completed an album of orchestrations of music by the American microtonal composer Easley Blackwood, a disc whose production required a completely unique and hugely challenging process. We also talk about Matthew's unique and deeply musical family background, what it's like collaborating with his brother, Ed Sheeran, and much more. I hope you enjoy the discussion. Matthew Sheeran, welcome to the Samuel Andreyev podcast. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Samuel. It's a pleasure.
I'm interested in the conjunction of the popular and savant styles, but today in some ways they've never seemed so far apart. You seem to be one of those rare artists who's involved in both worlds. So what do you think? Can the worlds of, let's say, composition and more popular things be brought together again?
Well, may I start by quoting Easley Blackwood, who's the composer for the album that we're going to be discussing, because he was was another one of these people that sort of crossed into these two worlds quite unusually. So I'm not particularly fond of rock music or any of the other popular styles, but I think it'd be a very healthy thing if there could be a rapprochement of some sort between classical and popular music. Going in the route that I did with this project, doing all the synthesis in the professional studio, I came into contact with that other world, and I found that there are some very fascinating, talented individuals working in what you might call commercial music, the likes of which most of my colleagues never meet. I found the contact with these people tremendously stimulating. And Blackwood was quite snobby. He was very particular and he had very strong opinions about music. So if he hadn't had this experience with these people, he would have, he would have had a not as a richer musical experience, I think.
Definitely, yeah. Well, it's ironic actually, because of course the Easley Blackwood album that came out on CD Records, and what was the year that the LP was released? The Microtonal Music LP.
So the LP was released, I believe, in the early 1980s, and then it was re-released on CD in, I think, 1994 with a couple of extra tracks of some acoustic microtonal music as well.
Right. Well, the irony there, of course, is that album was, by the standards of contemporary composition, a smash hit. A lot of people have heard that. Yeah. So what do you make of that? Why do you think these pieces have resonated with people?
I think there's nothing similar to this, really. I think they're very, very unique, and no one else thought to try and do something like this because it was such a difficult thing to do. And Blackwood would not have been able to do it at all without the help of the mix engineers and in the studio. So the guy who was helping him, Robert Dumas, he worked with Prince and John Lennon and Janet Jackson, and this was pretty difficult even for him to reprogram the synthesizers to be able to play what Blackwood wanted. I don't know if I answered the question.
No, well, we should probably clarify just for our listeners that we're talking about a new album that Matthew has created of arrangements and transcriptions of compositions by the American experimental microtonal composer Easley Blackwood. And Easley Blackwood is certainly a fascinating figure. He's, he became obsessed with microtonal tunings of various sorts and composed music that uses these tunings extensively. And because of the practical impossibility of having these conceptions of music performed in any kind of ordinary concert situation, he decided that the best way to present these compositions was through the intermediary of electronics, where of course you can have very precise microtonal tunings. So what Matthew has done is to take these pieces and to present them for I guess for the first time as instrumental compositions. And so walk us through the process of doing that. How were you able to translate these electronic pieces into things that could be played by humans?
It was a very, very long process, and there are many, many stages, and it can be quite confusing, but I'll try my best. So these pieces were written in the late 70s, early 80s. Blackwood got he got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities in America to explore tuning systems of equal temperaments. So an equal temperament is a equal division of the octave. So the 12-note scale that we have on the piano, that's an equal temperament. So there's 12 notes there. But you can divide the octave into other numbers. For example, you could divide it into 13, 14, 15, 11. Pick a number and you can divide the octave into that. A way to visualize this, let's say you have a guitar. So you've got the octave in the middle of the guitar, which is a harmonic normally, and then you've got the 12 frets going up to it. But you could have a different amount of frets, as I said, 11, 13, 22, etc. So this is quite a good way to imagine it. So why would you want to do that? So these other equal temperaments, they have one thing that they can do that you can also do with 12 notes is modulate. So this is why Blackwood chose this type of microtonal tuning systems as opposed to the other ones that are available, such as just intonation, and there's some other complex ones as well. So he wrote, they're called the 12 microtonal etudes. So he's using between 13 and 24 divisions of the octave for each one. And there are certain historical styles from the common practice period which lend themselves to each equal division of the octave better than others. So he was very careful what style to choose for each etude. They're mainly in a sort of early 20th century French, this sort of style. So, but he also has Baroque. He chooses Baroque music. There's gamelan scales, classical, romantic, etc., etc. So he wrote. He was able to hear this music using something called a Motorola Scalatron, which was this retunable organ. So that's was how he was able to hear. He was able to play the music on this and then transcribe it. And you were saying about the accuracy earlier of these pitches. What you might not know is that actually on the original recording there is actually an issue with the accuracy, because Blackwood uses a sort of generator of an amount of cents per step of the octave, and he wasn't able to get the exact precision that you would do these days. So some of the higher octaves will be slightly out of tune with the lower octaves in these recordings. You might not be able to tell, but it still was not completely possible to realize these compositions in the late 70s, early 80s. So how did he record it? So he had his own notation system, a different notation system for each etude, where there's a chart at the top with every single note in the chromatic scale that's numbered. So let's say it's the 13-note etude. Here's a chart, and it's not just 13 different notes, because you also have enharmonic equivalents, as we do with the 12-note system. So many of them have two different ways of spelling the same note. So it's very, very hard to read and decipher. But this isn't the score that Blackwood actually used when he recorded them himself. He had to then translate this himself into what I call scordatura notation. So scordatura is mostly known with, for example, string music, where you retune I don't know, the bottom string. So Kodai's sonata for solo cello, he lowers the C and the G strings by a semitone to B and F sharp. But in the score, you don't see a B and an F sharp. You see a C and a G still. So what you're hearing is not what you're seeing in the score. So Blackwood did this for the microtonal etudes by translating them into what looks like 12-tone music. But as I said, what you see is not what you hear. So, for example, coming back to 13 notes, the 13-note octave would be a minor ninth in 12-tone music. So if you play a minor ninth after reprogramming the keyboard, you'll hear an octave. I actually have an example of some other music which is written in this notation by Andrew Aaron Hunt. I'm just going to hold that up. So you'll see it sort of looks like Hindemith or something, but this actually I don't know if that's focused or not. This actually sounds like sort of microtonal bark. So this is Andrew Aaron Hunt's The Equal Tempered Keyboard. Really, really great piece, using equal divisions of the octave from 5 to 20. And this is completely playable. So that's a modern example. Coming back to Blackwood, so he was then able to play this in the studio. They had to retune the polyfusion synthesizer for the timbre and the particular tuning system for every single part. So it took absolutely ages. I believe 1 minute of music took about 2 hours, according to an interview with Blackwood. So he recorded that. He also had a click track. He was listening to a click track so he could synchronize everything. But it's very difficult when you're recording things this way to make them sound musical and like a proper ensemble. And this was an issue that came up when I was re-recording them. In fact, some of the solutions that Blackwood came up with, I independently came up with as well. For example, in the 23-note etude, he divides the very fast flourishes in the what's a flute-like instrument in the original into 2 different parts. So I orchestrated this for harp. So I orchestrated it for 2 harps played by 1 harpist, and it'll go from E major to E flat major just like that. Which obviously with the pedals, it's better to have 2 harps, the second harp tuned to E flat, and then it can immediately get going with that. So, so I had to, but basically I had to create this 12-tone version, this scordatura version of the etudes. Blackwood didn't leave anyone a copy, which it would have been really useful if he had, because I think he would have got more performances. Because his notation is very, very difficult to read. And so I created the 12-tone version, and then but you can put that into a digital audio workstation such as Logic and then program it to sound microtonal. So a semitone will be a semitone in every single tuning system. So a 12-tone semitone will be the same as a 13-tone semitone, if that makes sense. And then from that, I then had to do another translation. It's very confusing. You had to do another translation into tonal 12-tone music so that the musicians would be able to play it. And this had various levels of success depending on which etude I was translating.
So wait, just to make sure I've understood that. So you would approximate the pitch to the nearest semitone, and then provide an ordinarily written score to the performers. Is that right?
No, that's not right. You'd think that would be what would work, but that could work, but the music would not follow the same logic as the original. And to get a really musical performance, we needed the music to sound the same. And because the whole steps and the half steps are different sizes than they are in 12-tone music, the music drifts drifts out of key. So in the original, let's say it starts in B major, it will end in B major. But when you translate it, it will end in a different key, normally lower, maybe a tone lower, etc. And this is one of the strange sort of, there's a different logic to these microtonal tuning systems. It's a bit like with non-Euclidean geometry. There are triangles that have angles greater than 180 degrees or less than 180 degrees. So yeah, so we translated, I translated it into tonal music. And then there's this software called Melodyne. And with Melodyne, it's mostly used in pop music. You can, it's mainly for putting things in tune rather than out of tune, but you can use it for the opposite of what it's designed for.
So it's meant as an auto tune, basically, right? To force pitches into a particular intonation scheme.
It's not. It's mainly used that way, but the people that designed it wanted it to be used as a sort of creative tool as well. Mm-hmm. But as far as I know, there's only been one attempt to do something similar, and that was to record the music of Nicola Vicentino. Have you heard of Vicentino?
No, not at all.
So Vicentino's a Renaissance composer that wrote music using ancient Greek microtonal scales, using up to sort of 31 pitches per octave. And he wrote this music.
How is this notated? How is this notated? I've never heard of this.
It's got dots. It's quite hard to read, but it's been translated into modern notation. Oh, I can send you a recording that we can feature on the podcast. It's very interesting. Yeah. It's very. I would say it was quite similar to Gesualdo and what Gesualdo's doing. It's sort of word painting. It's about suffering, and you'd have the strange microtonal intervals coming in. I'd say Gesualdo's probably. They're sort of thinking in the same way. So with Vicentino, I don't think this was actually played in his lifetime. He also had the archcembalo, which was an instrument that could play this on a keyboard. So I think in around 2008, Jonathan Wild, in order to learn how to sing it with the microtonal tuning, they had to create a sort of guide recording using Melodyne. So they did the performance with normal tuning, and then they had each singer sing their part in isolation so that they could get a musical performance. And then they retuned it on the computer with Melodyne, and then were able to learn how to sing that way. This was a... You know about Simha Aram and the African drumming, how they were able to transcribe the African drumming. They did it in a similar way, where they record everyone drumming, and then each individual will have some headphones on, and then they'll play their part, and that it would have been impossible to transcribe usually. So there's all these tricks that you can do.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like the music of Easley Blackwood required a technological solution that might not have existed during his lifetime.
Yeah, totally. Because the music is quite conventional music actually, and there's a conventional score, very well written. It suggests certain instruments. It suggests textures. Sometimes it's quite specific. Sometimes it's quite fantastical. So there's quite. But he was expecting people to be playing this only on synthesizers, and said that no one should ever attempt to play it on acoustic instruments ever, because he didn't believe that the level of precision would be possible, or that instrumentalists would want to do it. I think he believed that brass players would be able to do it, but they wouldn't want to, or they just hate it.
Well, it's interesting you would say it's conventional. I mean, it is and it isn't. It's conventional I suppose, in the sense that he's referring to rhythmic conventions and stylistic conventions that are familiar from historical periods, for sure. And an untrained listener can pick up on those very easily. So there are pieces that certainly resemble Baroque music or classical music in that sense. But it's also most definitely not conventional in the sense that it's like if you take a known thing, a familiar thing, and completely radically reconfigure one dimension of it, but leave all the others untouched, then you end up with something that has a quality of strangeness to it. And I was listening to the Blackwood album this morning, and it sounds, and I mean this in the most positive sense, it's one of the strangest things I've heard. Strange in a way that has intrigued me very much, because it's familiar, but it's also deeply strange because of this new intonation system. So one thing I'm curious about, I'd love to know what you think about this, is would he have been aware of that strangeness? Was that something that that he was intending as a result of this? Or
this is an interesting question, because in the microtonal music scene, there's something called Zen harmonic, which is the strangeness that you're talking about, to try and get the music to have that strangeness. Well, actually, Blackwood was actually not trying to do that at all. He was trying to find things in common with these tuning systems, with the 12-tone tuning system. I would compare Blackwood to Schoenberg and what Schoenberg was doing. Schoenberg's music, the pitch dimension was very radical, but underneath the hood, it's Brahms, possibly, you could argue. Would you agree, or is that too simplistic?
No, I think that's a very good comparison, absolutely. But in both cases, and this is where I think they have a point in common. See, both of them are thinking in terms of historical continuity and tradition, but they're imagining that you can radically alter one parameter to the exclusion of the others. In the case of Schoenberg, he was thinking in terms of Wagnerian chromaticism and Brahmsian continuous development of little cells. That was his musical background, and he brought those two things together and pushed the chromaticism as far as it would go, to the extent that he had to come up with a new system of ordering these chromatic pitches in order to have a language that could still function. But what he did was so radical, in a sense, on the level of pitch, but all the other dimensions are left more or less untouched. So the rhythmic dimension, for example, the textural dimension, the type of expression also, all of those things are relatively close to what you might have heard in a Brahms piece. But the pitch aspect... No, please go ahead.
There are like a few exceptions, aren't there? Like Farben, the orchestral piece, that is sort of textural. That's quite a radical piece, I would argue, by Schoenberg.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. The difference is that once he got into the 12-tone system, though, he largely abandoned those sorts of textural and coloristic explorations, except maybe in things like the orchestral variations, Opus 31, where there's a quite remarkable color to that piece, I would say. But some of the other 12-tone pieces, like the piano concerto, for example, are quite conventional in their basic aesthetic thrust. And there's something of that with Easley Blackwood, right? There's the taking one aspect of the music and completely transfiguring it in a way that is utterly novel. I mean, I've never heard anything like those pieces. And then there are other aspects of it that are more or less, what would you say, very similar to what you would have gotten in a historical style.
Yeah, what is also quite interesting about Blackwood's microtonal etudes is the first time you hear them is very different to subsequent times you hear them. Your ear will get used to these tuning systems, and the first time you hear them is a massive shock. When I did the retunings, I retuned the music using Melodyne, and I didn't listen at all until I'd finished everything, and then I'd listen, very rough, for the first time. And I remember listening to 14 notes and just being so shocked at how sort of raw and primitive it sounded, and it made me think of Stravinsky with his bassoon solo at the beginning of The Rite of Spring. I think this was the effect that he was sort of going for. We don't hear it like that anymore, but perhaps Audience Sasson, the people that heard it at the time, it got through in that way.
Yeah, I think...
Perhaps, I don't know.
I think there can be a dimension to projects like this where the way that it's received is not necessarily the way that it's intended to be received, or that the creator imagines it will be heard, because it is so unusual. So I don't know what he would make of the reception of his pieces, if he would be surprised or taken aback by the way people actually listen to them. But it strikes me that they're probably stranger than he imagined they were. And there are a few...
Because he got used to it. He got used to how they sounded.
Right. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even sound microtonal to me often when I listen to them. But that's how kind of desensitized I've become.
Well, so when you started actually hearing the finished recordings, so what was your evaluation of the outcome of the project? Was it what you were expecting to hear, or did it sound very different from what you were imagining?
Well, so I was working on this in conjunction with my mix engineer, Brian Bolger. He's a guitarist in the Dublin Guitar Quartet, but he also is very techie. And we didn't actually record all the etudes to begin with. We only did the easier ones with a few parts. Just we didn't know if this would work or not. And I was expecting best case scenario it to sound like a mellotron or something like that, like something interesting, but not with all the sort of acoustic information you'd have with a normal recording. And it was just amazing how well it worked, how powerful the Melodyne software was. We recorded 22 notes, which only has 5 parts. Recorded it it's in B major, 22 notes, but you'd say it was closest to B major. So, but my arrangement's in C major because that works better for stringed instruments. So you have all the open strings, and then you retune it into B major for the microtonal version. So this was the first time that we knew this was a complete piece, because there's only 5 parts, strings. So we knew it worked, and then from then on we had to find a way of. There's some very, very complicated pieces in the etudes, on an orchestral scale, effects and things, and I had to find a way to do this. So what the solution was to record each instrumental family in their own session, and each member would be in an isolation booth. So you have violin, viola, cello. They'd all be in a separate isolation booth where they could see each other and they could play together. But the sound is isolated, and because Melodyne only retunes monophonically. That's the best way to do it. It's quite an unnatural way of doing it, but it worked. Everyone had a click track, headphones with a click track. And they also had, there was a monitor with the bar number. The tempo is changing quite a lot. So this is all really useful stuff. So we recorded the strings, because the strings are mainly playing accompanying parts. It made sense to orchestrate this for strings because there are no places to breathe. So it's either organ type music or strings. I edited that so it sounded really good. And then we brought in the winds. So and with winds, you obviously can have doubling instruments. So we have flute, piccolo, alto flute. That's just one player. They can overdub every part. And then we had bassoon, contrabassoon, oboe, English horn, cor anglais, etc., etc. So we did the winds, and we did the brass, and then finally we did the harp. Now the harp was just recorded by itself because it would have been too complicated to record that with other people. And then we edited the recordings until they sounded like a real performance. And then once that was done, then we did the retuning, which was actually the most simple part of the process because it's very straightforward in a way. So you've got these different stems, the different instrumental parts, and then you create what's called a guide track. So the guide track would be the notes you want, the microtonal notes. And then in Melodyne, you then drag the 12-tone notes to the microtonal notes visually. You don't even need to hear it. And then you listen back, and if you hear any discrepancies, which are very obvious, it'll be sort of a minor second type sound or something, then you then you know that that needs to be corrected. And this means that there are no mistakes at all in the recording, because you can check it with the guide track. So there were mistakes, but you're able to correct the notes to the notes they should be. So it's quite, I imagine a lot of 20th century music, the recordings, there must be quite a few wrong notes in them from going through this process, but which you don't notice, perhaps.
I'd like to just briefly jump in here and say that this channel exists because of the support that I receive on Patreon. If you are a regular listener and would like to see more of what I do, please consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/Samuel Andreyev. You'll find the link in the video or podcast description. You'll get exclusive previews, the ability to submit questions, CDs, signed prints, and more. But you can also support my work by subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, or joining in on the discussion through the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and let's get back to the interview. I think the recordings sound remarkable, and I know what the challenges are like of recording in that way, because I've done that myself, and it is very, very difficult to take performers who are recording in isolation booths and make it sound like an organic performance. It's very, very challenging, and you've pulled that off. So I think that's remarkable.
No, Brian, the mix engineer, he pulled it off. He's astonishing, proper perfectionist. 90% of that is him for sure, and the rest is the musicians.
Right, of course. So
the main problem was playing in time, having everything synchronized. So there had to be a bit of cheating on the computer, sort of tidying up some of the rhythms, etc.
Yeah, so the way you're describing...
Also, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, also there were some things that I did wrong in the orchestration. For example, the cor anglais. Do you play the cor anglais? You probably do.
I used to be a professional oboist, although I don't. So yes, I've played the cor anglais.
Yeah. So in the 14 no etude, some of the notes I gave the cor anglais because I wanted that sound were too high, only just too high. So he recorded them lower, and then we pitched them back up. So you could get away with things like that. Errors that you wouldn't normally have gotten away with. I guess you could have just got the oboe, put it onto the oboe, but then it's the transposition's different, etc.
It's funny what you're describing, because it actually connects a lot with what Frank Zappa was doing towards the end of his life when he was creating compositions for the synclavier. And there's an interview he gave, I don't remember if it's in the real Frank Zappa book or somewhere else, where he talks about the fact that after a lifetime working with performers and hearing their complaints and having to deal with their mistakes and their unreliability and so on, he was very happy to have found a workflow that allowed him to stay at home in his studio in Los Angeles and compose music exactly the way he wanted it to. And if he wanted to have 22 notes in the space of 1 second on the bassoon, he could do that and have the synclavier produce the result for him. And so that was for him a kind of utopia that technology made possible. So
is this sample libraries?
Yeah, the synclavier is it's an early kind of sampler keyboard that allowed composers to work with sequencing, basically, in the same sense that a contemporary DAW works, although in a much more primitive way. So you could punch notes onto a staff, and then the synclavier would play them back using whatever instrumental sound you wanted.
But if you got a bassoonist to play that at a slower tempo and then sped it up on the computer, that kind of hybrid approach could be even more interesting, because you've got that sort of human element to the music, which is really essential. And I think what people found challenging about the original Blackwood synthesizers was actually the synthesizers as much as the microtonal elements. Not everyone, but when they hear it acoustically, a bit like when you play a MIDI composition on Sibelius, we can know what that should sound like, but for others, it's very hard to imagine.
Well, I think what's interesting in both cases, with the Zappa recordings I mentioned and the Easley Blackwood project, is that you have two artists who are working at the very edge of what's technologically possible at a given time. And this was also the case, incidentally, with Edgar Varèse in the compositions he was writing in the 1920s, where he was obsessed with the advent of a radically new electronic music for which he did not completely have the means yet, right? Because the instruments and the technology weren't mature. And that was a lifelong quest for him, and it actually caused him to stop composing. Well, there are other reasons for that, but for a long time, he stopped writing music because he was concerned that the visions that he had were not technologically possible yet. And had he been born 30 or 40 years later, of course, it would have been no problem. But I'm always interested in figures like that who are taking the technology of their time and pushing it to its very limits. And what do you think about this idea? I wonder what those limits are today, really, because the technology that we have now is so unbelievably powerful that it's hard to conceive of what it can't do. What do you think? Are there things that technologically are still outside of our grasp in music?
What I find interesting is what's happened in chess. So chess computers, chess engines, they're better than humans, and they've discovered things that are counterintuitive that humans never would have thought of. For example, one of the things they do, they like to push the flank pawns, the H pawn. They like to throw that up the board. And now humans have started incorporating that into their own games. So my feeling is that there are things that we don't know about yet, which we cannot imagine that the AI will discover. And rather than us listening to AI music, we'll just incorporate those things into our own music, and that will be a bit like with chess. Like no one watches chess engine games; they're not interesting. There's no drama because it's two machines. But so I feel there is hope for human music and kind of progression. Did you have any thoughts on that yourself about what could be avenues of exploration?
I would be inclined to agree with you. Yeah, I think that AI as a tool to assist composers and songwriters and other types of creators of music, I think that's most likely the frontier where the most interesting things will be happening. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I have no clue. Certainly in the composition.
I mean, if you gave an AI 73 notes or something, it would be. I mean, who knows what it would do? You know, what it would discover about that tuning system.
Right, absolutely. And there are things that humans might not have the time or the patience to investigate thoroughly. So, for instance, there's a thing called algorithmic composition in the composition world, right, where you can formalize a process of some kind and then input it into a program like Open Music or Patchwork. There are other programs of this sort that have been developed over the years that allow composers to generate either rhythmic layers or pitches or things like this based upon some kind of formalized input. And the advantage of working that way, of course, is the computer is not able to do things that a human can't do, but it can do them way more quickly and iterate them way more quickly. So, for example, whereas it might take a human a week to calculate some complicated rhythmic idea, the computer can do it in a second, and it can do it 1,000 times. And so then the human composer can then take these 1,000 iterations of the idea and then just pick the best one. Whereas if you had to do all of that by hand, it would take you weeks or months or God knows how long.
Or the computer will tell you what the best one is. It's like 1,000,000 of them instead of 1,000.
Right, exactly, yeah. All right, I'm still thinking in terms of the last century. But, yeah, so who knows? I think
every musical era thinks that it's been done and music's finished and everything that's been tried has been tried, and it's never the case. There's always someone that comes along and disproves that, and we may we're making the same mistake as previous generations made, thinking this way. So I'm very optimistic personally about this.
Absolutely. But wouldn't you agree, Matthew, though, that artists need limits to push against, right? And
totally, yeah.
Creative people need constraints. If you don't have constraints, it's difficult to get the full measure of your capacity for invention. And
this was how I was taught composition, actually. My teacher was like, okay, you're only writing a piece with 4 notes, only those 4 notes. And it made you sort of, think outside the box. I actually wrote a piece with 2 notes once, which worked particularly well. There's a sort of tonic and a dominant kind of dichotomy. It's hard to believe, but you can do quite a lot with 2 notes. as well. And the same with microtonal scales, because you're not using all the notes, you're just using subsets, like in with 12-tone music. When I mean tonal music, and most pop music would only use 7 notes. So you're not using all of the notes, you're just using some of them at some of the time, if that makes sense.
Well, one of the things I discovered, because I studied electronic composition at IRCAM for a year, and I was struck by the fact that those tools were so powerful. I mean, you could get Max MSP, for example, to do just about anything. It's a completely open visual programming language that allows you to generate whatever you want. Any kind of signal processing, you can do it live, or you can do it not in a live situation. And I was fascinated by the possibilities of these tools, but at the same time, I was left wondering, what are the constraints? What are the limits? Because the thing I've always found stimulating is, and naturally I tend to gravitate towards, what is the smallest, tightest, most constrained box that I can put myself in that will force me to find solutions that I would not otherwise have dreamt of. And to be given these unbelievably powerful technologies, in a sense, robbed me of that precious constraint that I needed to push against.
Because those constraints would have been there for Stockhausen, wouldn't they? Like in a big way. And that was perhaps helpful for him, although it took a very long time for him to write that music, early electronic music.
Absolutely. Things like Gesang der Jünglinge, or the 2 electronic etudes that he made in the 1950s, where there was just hundreds or thousands of hours of labor that went into making those pieces, because he had to actually physically splice the tape and record every single sine wave individually to make those composite tones. And now, of course, you could do that in a couple of hours.
And the same with Conlan Nankara, with his player pianos. He had to punch in the holes individually, thousands and thousands of notes. Had to, but now that would take seconds.
Right.
Or even less, maybe.
Right. So that's not, that sort of chasing after impossible technologies, in a sense, is not looming quite so large on the horizon at the moment. But how did you get interested in the music of Easley Blackwood in the first place? Because it's not a name that one necessarily encounters on a regular basis in the composition world.
Well, when I was 17, I was exploring all these composers. There was just so much to discover, 20th century music, medieval music, etc. And somehow I think I found the CD on Amazon, and got the CD, and then, listened to it. And then, I spent a few years writing this violin solo piece. And I was like, once I finish this, I want to look into microtonal music and write microtonal music. So that's how I got back into them. I tried to do this when I was at university, actually, but the technology, it was just too difficult to get it to work. But now it's a lot easier for anyone to write music using microtones. There's quite a lot of music on YouTube, very high quality, mainly sort of in a popular style, such as Sevish, Brendan Burns, etc. Really, really good microtonal music. And Blackwood actually thought that because of because it works so well with electronics, that popular music was the future for microtonality. Even though he didn't like popular music, he was sort of slightly open-minded about that. That's how I discovered it. And then I managed to get hold of the score. You can't buy the score because Blackwood has self-published it. Just to let everyone know, Blackwood actually died earlier this year in January, so he wasn't actually able to hear this album, wasn't aware it was going on. The intention is for the album, which will be released on Sadie Records, to be released on the anniversary or around the anniversary of Blackwood's passing.
Okay, so
if he'd known this was possible, I think he would have written more microtonal music. So we've sort of lost out, I feel, and I'm hoping that this project will demonstrate to people that you can, that this is an interesting an interesting way of writing acoustic microtonal music. It doesn't have to be 36 parts; it can be 2 or 3 parts. So we'll see what comes of that.
So you mentioned that you were interested in composing microtonal music yourself, and so would you imagine duplicating this kind of a workflow, or would you write pieces that could be played by conventional instruments but using microtones? So, for example, of course, it's possible to play microtones on a violin, and you yourself are a violinist. Or you can, of course, take a harp and retune the strings. You can very easily have chordatura tunings on harps. So what would you imagine would be the more interesting approach to take? Actual performance of these intervals on conventional instruments, or some kind of electronic intervention?
Well, the approach I was taking, these are, I'm sort of writing several pieces at once. Only one of them was finished. Was to try and have something where there was octave equivalence. So an octave on the piano is an octave in these different tuning systems, just because that was just simpler for me. So one of the pieces uses 13 notes, but one of the notes is not used. So it's like having music with 11 notes out of 12. Probably no one would notice that 12th note is missing. I did write one for 7 notes, so splitting the octave into 7 equally spaced tones. I find this quite an interesting scale. It's sort of like it's like the whole tone scale. So with the whole tone scale, wherever you start, the structure's the same. There are no modes, and it's the same with the equally tempered 7-note scale. But our ear doesn't want to hear it like that, so our ear will like impose a mode on it sometimes. Like it will be Aeolian or Ionian or whatever, and I found that pretty interesting because I wrote this harp piece. I wrote it very intuitively, trial and error, because there's no sort of theory behind this sort of thing. So I wrote this for harp because the harp has 7 strings, so you can retune those 7 strings relatively easy. And I think it was quite successful, actually. There's some possible other systems incorporating the pedals on the harp, where you could get up to 18 notes, perhaps, with very convoluted sort of retuning of the strings.
It's interesting what you say there, because there have been many different approaches to microtonal music by different composers over the decades. A figure like Ivan Vishnegradsky, for example, was experimenting with microtonality 100 years ago. And Charles Ives, of course, wrote his quarter-tone piano pieces in the 1910s or earlier. And so this is not exactly a new idea, but what strikes me is that...
And as I said, Vicentino as well, from the Renaissance. And there are examples from other classical and Baroque and Romantic period as well. Very small, but they do exist.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic in and of itself. What strikes me, though, is that all of these approaches are highly individual in nature. In other words, different composers will take a very, very different approach to using microtones. It's almost as though microtonality is still, despite hundreds of years now of excursions into these possibilities, it's still the Badlands, right? There's no unified theory behind any of it. So as you're describing...
But is there a unified theory behind 12-tone music? Think of how the variety. I see microtonality not as a genre. It's all genres. You can have microtonal jazz, microtonal pop music, non-Western music, pretty much all of it's microtonal. This is what's so... exciting about this technology, in that it doesn't just apply to classical or pop or non-Western music. It's there's a lot to be discovered still.
Well, this ties together a little bit with my opening question with respect to the potential coming together of popular and savant styles, and this is perhaps a way that could happen. I wonder, what do you think?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Did you have a favorite etude of the 12? That was a question that Blackwood would often ask people, apparently. He'd always ask what their favorite was.
Not particularly.
Or favorites. No.
They struck me as all being quite different from each other. And probably the first thing that I responded to, interestingly enough, was not so much the different tuning systems, because I think maybe after I've heard it 10 or 15 times, I'll be in a better position to recognize the different tunings. At first, it's so strange and unfamiliar. It really is new territory, I think, for me and probably for a lot of listeners, that it's hard to evaluate them on the basis of this or that tuning being used. So in the absence of that, I responded probably more to the rhythmic dimension, at least on a first hearing. And so that was something that appealed to me in some of the faster ones, I suppose, is that you can combine this kind of rapid, energetic, rhythmic profile with these tunings. I found that very striking, because a lot of microtonal music in the sort of composition world tends to be very slow. There are people like maybe the American
Lamont Young.
Lamont Young, yes, exactly, or Phil Niblock is another one who makes these.
Oh, I don't know him.
Right,
Phil Niblock.
Niblock, Niblock.
Niblock.
Yeah. So he's a fascinating character based in New York City. He's 90 years old now, and he's basically spent his entire career making these very, very long, site-specific microtonal drone pieces that are utterly bewitching. I've heard some performances of these things, and they're astounding. There's a kind of granite-like physicality to these pieces that is quite overwhelming. But in both instances, you mentioned Lamont Young and Phil Niblock is another. The music is very slow, and that's partly because you want to be able to hear all of the rhythmic beats between the frequencies and hear all the subtleties of these tunings and so on. And in the Blackwood etudes, you have totally conventional rhythms and sometimes quite fast ones.
Blackwood didn't like this slow drone-based music. He was very much interested in the chord progressions, the kind of the things that could be completely unique to each microtonal tuning system, pathways that don't exist in the 12-tone system. So the modulation, because as I said, with the equal temperaments, you can modulate in equal temperaments, a bit like changing time zone. Like you could have a clock with 16 hours on, for example. There were. I think I was saying earlier about how he was trying to find similarities between these tuning systems and 12. He was very interested in that, and it should be said that some of the notes overlap with the 12-tone system. For example, if you have 16 notes to the octave, you still have diminished seventh chords, the exact same diminished seventh chords as you would in 12, because it can be divided. The octave can also be divided into 4. You can have augmented chords if it can be divided into 3. So 15 notes, there are augmented chords, the exact same augmented chords. 18 notes, you have 3 different whole tone scales. So whole tone scale is 6 notes. So 6 times 3 is 18. So when you listen to the 18 note etude, you hear a lot of whole tone scales. And then with 23 notes, if it's a prime number, it has nothing in common with 12. So he had to look elsewhere. So he looked towards Balinese gamelan, so the Slendro and Pelog scales. There's this very strange scale where it's a kind of inversion of the normal diatonic scale. So basically the half steps are now whole steps. It's very, I think it's called Mavila or Mavila. Very, very strange music. So your minor chords are now major chords. So instead of 3 major chords, you have 3 minor chords and 4 major chords, or whatever it is. 3.
Right. So, of course, it's worth pointing out that microtonal composition is a comparatively, what would you say, non-standard thing to do in the Western tradition, but in other musical contexts, it's completely normal. right? Because different cultures use, of course, different tuning systems, different scales, and they don't even necessarily think of them as microtonal, of course, because they're simply, that's how they tune their instruments. You mentioned gamelan music, but there are, of course, many other examples. Indian music
And also
being...
before 12-tone equal temperament was standardized, the music would have been microtonal by modern standards as well in Western music. Not much of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So are you interested in the music of non-Western cultures and things like Indian music, for example, the different modes and tuning systems that they use?
Yeah, very, very much so. As I said, when I was 17, I was, starting at 17, I started exploring a lot of this music. Kind of got a heads up from Georges Ligeti. There's a book which has a copy of his record collection and a lot of Okora CDs. So I listened to a lot of this stuff when I was at university. We can possibly play some on the podcast if it's allowed. I'll send you some of the ones that I really liked.
Yeah, that would be very good. Yeah, no, I know Ligeti was fascinated by the music of the Bada Linda tribe, for example, in Africa, and many other things. Very interested in gamelan music, as was Boulez, actually. Actually, Boulez is interesting in a sense because he was one of the first composers, I suppose, along with Messiaen, to really be interested in that and to listen to sort of ethnographic recordings and to have that influence his music in a very pronounced way. André Jolivet also.
Well, and obviously Kodai and Bartok and Debussy, there's whole tone scales.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So perhaps that's one direction that would be extremely fruitful for composers to investigate moving forward. It's exactly what you can do with these possibilities. It seems to be endless.
I don't know how politically correct this would be, but you could retranscribe some of that music and record it with Western instruments isolated and then retune it, do arrangements. The Kronos Quartet, they do sort of things similar to that. So, but I don't know if you could do that these days, but that could be quite an interesting avenue.
You could do that. I think where you would find a limit would be that there are certain aspects of other musical cultures that I think if you're not born into them, in a sense, if you're not raised with that being a normal form of musical expression, it's very difficult to learn that from the outside. So I'll give you a concrete example of that. In Eastern European folk music, so the music of Macedonia, for example, or Bulgaria, certain parts of Hungary, the rhythmic conception in that music is utterly different from our own, in the sense that we always think in terms of equal divisions of a large beat unit. So we start with the whole note and divide it into 2 half notes and 4 quarter notes, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an exact 1-to-2 ratio with each of these rhythmic divisions. But in Eastern European folk music, they have 2 main beat values, one of which is slightly longer than the other, but they're not exact multiples of each other. So it's like there's a short beat and a long beat. And when those sorts of things get transcribed, as Bartok tried to do in his string quartets, for example, you end up with these sort of asymmetric meters like 7/16 or 5/16 with beat groupings of 2 and 3. But it's not quite right, because
it's like with jazz with the swing. It's not what you read on the score, is it?
Exactly. And so when Western performers see these things, they're always going 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1, and it's like it's not the same. It's a gestural thing, and it's also it's a physical thing, right? You have to sort of feel these beat patterns and be able to play them intuitively. And I think if you're not in that culture, it's not a matter of cultural appropriation or anything like that. I don't believe in that concept at all. But
there's a recording by, I think they're called the Podrodsky Ensemble or something like that. They did a recording of Les Noces by Stravinsky with real Russian folk singers, not opera. That's a very interesting recording. You should check that out if you haven't heard it. It also uses player pianos, and it's sort of like black and white music. Very, very interesting arrangement of that piece.
Aha, no, I haven't heard that. But I can
Some
think
people
of
don't like it, but it sounds great to me.
yeah, no, I'll look out for that for sure. Another thing that comes to mind, maybe you're familiar with the Ballet Mécanique of George Antheil. You know that piece?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a piece. It's another piece actually that was impossible to play as the composer had intended. I think the premiere was in 1922 or 1923, and his idea was to have multiple synchronized player pianos playing things that a human pianist could never do, such as a glissando covering the entire keyboard 10 times in the space of 1 second. And of course, with MIDI keyboards, that's no problem at all. It's very, very easy to do. So there was a composer in the U.S. somehow that got a copy of the score and decided to make a new version of the Ballet Mécanique using MIDI keyboards, and then toured around the world performing that version of the piece. Yeah.
Amazing.
So it is amazing. Yeah. I mean, this is a piece that for what 80 years was unperformable in its intended version, and then suddenly there it is. So
Wonder what else is out there that hasn't been performed and could be now, or maybe not performed but recorded, and it sounds like a performance. Because I imagine in architecture there'll be a lot of things that are impossible to build, the designs and things. But I just wonder about music, because you kind of lose the will to live if you don't sort of get it performed. So not many people would probably try that, but there must be some things out there that could be recorded now that are good.
There are certainly things that don't get done, or that don't get done very often, because there are practical limitations. Like, it's not so much that they're impossible, it's just that they're unwieldy and expensive to produce. So I think that's a concern. There are pieces, for example, written for absolutely gargantuan orchestras that are performable, but they're enormously costly to produce, so they don't get played. So that's a different form of impracticality, I suppose.
I just want to give a shout out to the musicians on the recording. So they're from the Budapest Scoring Orchestra, who mainly do commercial music, and that's how I got to know them. So they did like Squid Game and Parasite. And the cellist in the Blackwood album, he's the cellist that plays Wednesday's music on the Netflix series Wednesdays. There's this arrangement of Paint It Black, which is impossible. I think it's just been nominated for a Grammy. So, I just wanted to say what an amazing job they all did, because it was really, really not a very natural way of recording. It was during the pandemic as well when this is a sort of pandemic project. This is why I had time to do this. But it kind of, there seemed to be sort of spirit of the times type thing with this being done in the pandemic, and everyone's isolated from each other, but not at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, you might be the only composer who's found a way to harness that creatively in a way that really makes good use of that constraint. It's very interesting.
Well, there was a lot on YouTube, a lot of very well done. There was a Puccini opera on YouTube done that way, like really well. So it sounds really.
Yeah. No, I haven't come across that, but
yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear a little bit more about you and your own musical efforts and your own composition. So I understand that, I mean, you have a background as a trained composer, of course, and you studied at the Guildhall, and you have done a lot of film scoring. So
a lot more arranging, more arranging.
Arranging, okay. And my understanding is that the world of film scoring or film arranging is a fairly separate world from the world in which composers at those sorts of institutions typically move in. It's a kind of a separate professional network, if you like. So, and I've interviewed people who have done film and television music, and it's a different world. So, how do you manage to have your feet in both worlds, so to speak? And how did you move from studying composition to getting involved in film?
I guess I got. That was the plan all along, but I did get quite alienated from the contemporary composition scene, which is not an unusual thing. But I wouldn't say that I still have my foot in the contemporary classical world. Maybe more so. Now I'm getting interest from people such as yourself, but you probably wouldn't want to be associated with that as much these days either. But
well, I'm not in it anymore.
yeah.
So.
But you understand. You understand what it is, etc., etc. Yeah, and again, there are certain figures that have crossed over. That, for example, Takamitsu, he had a foot in both worlds. He wrote, the Kurosawa scores, really great stuff, but also did his concert music, and I think it's a very healthy. You get a lot of experience with real musicians in the commercial world because there's more money. Things have to be done a lot quicker, and you can learn quite quickly. You also have quite a big advantage if you're able to read sheet music and things. You don't have to read sheet music, but things can be done a lot easier and quickly. You don't even need to be that good. That already gives you quite a big advantage without having to be. You wouldn't have made it in the classical world, for example, but you can totally make it in the commercial world.
Okay, but wait a minute. Most people don't succeed in the commercial music world. Like very, very few people do. So
but I meant the skill set. The skill set, though, the skill set rather than the. I basically am very lucky. I don't think I can. I haven't done anything particularly amazing or anything.
But wouldn't you say that it's a different skill set involved in working in the commercial or popular music world?
Yeah, you have to have a kind of mercenary mindset to it. It's very helpful not to be emotionally attached to your work, so that because they're just going to ask you to scrap it and redo it. So you've got to sort of be very detached from what you're doing. And often the best stuff you're doing won't be used, and they'll want the more what's the word? Like more conventional solution.
Okay, so
generic's the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Could you expand a little bit on what you were saying earlier about feeling alienated from the composition scene? I mean, I imagine, as with most things, this was a process. It's not something that hits you overnight. But what were your interactions with that world like, and what led you to feel that you were perhaps better suited to work in another direction?
I guess there's not much dynamism in the contemporary classical music world. I think that's probably the crux of it. Does that make sense? It's sort of very kind of cushy. You've got your university sort of, you just stay there forever. There's no sort of challenges. It's not sort of cutting edge. I wouldn't want to sort of generalize though, but maybe you have some thoughts yourself.
Well, my sense is that in certain situations, yes, it can be quite cushy in the way that you described. Also, in the sense that there's really nothing to push against, because in art forms where there's no particular connection with the wider society, the work that you're doing is being ignored by everybody. So there's no particular critical pushback. There's just a kind of, what would you say, a kind of tensionless irrelevance, I suppose. But I think that those conditions that allow that to happen are no longer there. I think that it's like a flower that's been cut off at the roots. And so the flower is still there, but it's wilting from within. And a lot of the infrastructure that allows that to happen is still sort of there, but it's drying up. And I don't think there'll be much left of it. I mean, this is a prediction, and with all predictions, of course, there's a chance I'll be wrong, but I would suspect that in 10 years, the scene is going to look extremely different. The thing is...
Yeah, my old university course went to Sussex. They've changed the course now. They've made it more relevant for the modern world. So you get taught how to record studio work, which I would have loved to have been able to learn, because I had to sort of work this out myself with some friends and things. So I think they've had to do this, I believe, just in order to not get the department being cut. So, and it seems to have worked. So I guess the music courses will have to adapt to changing times.
Absolutely. And I think it's much less of an issue, by the way, for younger musicians who respond intuitively to changes in society. It's more a question for the older generation, I think, who are going to feel lost and adrift in this world and are not going to know how to adjust to it necessarily. So,
I mean, it's the same in commercial music. The older generation, they'll stop using them if they don't adapt or evolve, because the younger people will be know what to do. So I think you always have to. There's quite a lot of age discrimination just generally in this society. So I think as you get older, you really need to sort of keep on your toes and kind of adapt or evolve or die, as they say.
right. But you might be in a very interesting position in the sense that you're working in the commercial music world, but you also have this background as a composer. And so that, I imagine, led you to being exposed to things that you would not necessarily have heard otherwise, right? So the fact that you're interested in Ligeti and Easley Blackwood and these things, would you have discovered those things on your own, do you think? Or did they come about as a result of studying at the Guildhall and other places?
I think I discovered them by myself, but as you can these days with the internet. Although the commercial stuff I wouldn't have discovered by myself, because a lot of that is equally, there are things you can get out of it, even if it's not to your taste, like recording techniques, etc., etc. So I think that is actually the other way around. But yeah, I have in some of my arrangements, I've drawn on my knowledge of classical music and things. I've done microtonal music for radio. You don't tell them that it's microtonal, but I did this ancient Greek. I think it was an ancient Greek play or something. So I did some fake ancient Greek microtonal music. Do you know the two studies on ancient Greek scales by Harry Partch?
No, I don't know those pieces.
Oh, you don't know, but they're based on they're sort of the scales they're using are ancient Greek scales, but they also it's probably not how it would have sounded, but you get a sort of idea for the flavor of those scales. So as you know, you can write things like that. Yeah. There are other examples. For example, there's a composer called Brendan Burns, who's a microtonal composer, guitarist, but he writes music for podcasts as well. So he's very, very technically good at production, which is really important if you're self-publishing your music on YouTube or Bandcamp or whatever.
Right. Okay. So you're in a very interesting...
That's what classical musicians don't have. But I think since the pandemic, this is slowly changing because out of necessity, instrumentalists have had to learn how to record themselves at home, etc., etc. So hopefully this can be incorporated into the conservatoires and universities more so than it has been.
I suspect so. I mean, it'll be a matter of survival. You know, it's like if you don't adapt to the new technological reality, then you won't be able to get very far, I think. So, okay, but so I'm very interested in where you're at now then, because you have the broad musical curiosity and this very broad musical background, and you also have, you know, the ability to exist within the commercial music world. So, what do you think? In the best of all possible worlds, if things could go extraordinarily well for you and for your music over the next 5 to 10 years, what sort of work would you be doing and what sort of direction would you be moving in?
I'm very fortunate to be able to say I believe I'm already there. I'm very pleased with how things are going. The work that I'm doing is very interesting for me. I'm working with real musicians because in commercial music there's sample libraries, such Spitfire, etc., where you fake the instrumentalists, and I really, really don't enjoy doing that. I can do it relatively well because I know what these things should sound like, but it's kind of sort of soulless still. And I'm really hoping that there'll be some fundamental changes to that. I don't believe there's been much progress for around at least 10 years in that in the technology. And I imagine AI will be. A thing that I think is going to be possible soon is that you'll be able to sing the music into the computer. I'll sing a part, and then it will transform it into a trumpet, and you have all the expression and vibrato or whatever. I would go back to using sample libraries if that was if there could be more musicality there.
Okay, and so what about your own sort of conventionally notated pieces? So, for example, you have a very beautiful sonata for unaccompanied violin. What do you imagine you would do with a piece like that? Because, I mean, you can of course publish it and have it be performed as a concert piece. But do you think that's even an interesting or a viable way forward at this point for composers?
Well, the instrumentalists are still very keen on doing concerts because that's their livelihood, isn't it? I kind of treat my classical music as a sort of hobby. Sort of think of it more as a hobby than as part of my career. So the violin piece was just something I was writing on the side for a few years. It's very much the same with the microtonal music that I've been writing. I haven't written any for about 18 months because I've been very busy. I mostly do arranging now because you just be more productive with arranging, and you're not going to be asked to change it as much because there's only so many ways of doing it. So I guess I'm moving away from composing more so and wanting to do projects like this Blackwood album, so other people's music that was, someone needs to do something with it, and no one else was doing it. And because I'm financially independent, I can, there's more I can do than others could, perhaps.
Yeah, I interviewed Van Dyke Parks a few years ago, actually, and that was an interesting person to talk to because, of course, he's done solo albums and he's been a songwriter, very interesting songwriter. But most of the time, he's actually preferred to work behind the scenes, working with other artists, doing arrangements, working as an orchestrator, and effectively helping other artists to magnify, amplify their vision and to bring it to another artistic level because, of course, he's a highly trained composer. What do you think of a figure like that? Is that something that you would imagine yourself doing?
Well, this is something you don't even think is even an option when you're studying classical music. I mean, all of the composers, they just do everything by themselves. They're not they might collaborate with the musicians, but they're not collaborating with each other. Whilst in the pop world, the jazz world, there's a lot of co-writing, and it is once you do it yourself, it's incredibly stimulating because you're working with other people that they know more than you about certain things. They think about music differently, and you can. I don't know if there'd be a way to incorporate this into classical music more. I think there's a violin concerto I remember hearing on the radio when I was about 14 called the Butterfly Lovers Concerto. This is a Chinese concerto, very, very popular in China, and I believe it was written by more than one composer. So there are examples out there, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, composers, generally speaking, are...
Like, would you ever write with someone else on a piece, like 50-50 sort of...
it would depend on the person and the specific nature of the project, but I certainly wouldn't be against it. I think there's a sense in which composers have kind of evolved somehow to be these completely isolated, independent, creative figures. And one thing that I always found very hard to deal with was the idea that you would go off for 6 months to a year and write your piece by yourself, and then you'd give it to the performer. And the performer is sort of in this very passive role where they just have to kind of play what you've written. And I think that that's a recipe for a musical culture that is alienated and not very connected, really, in any fundamental sense, either to performers or to the audience or to indeed the structures that are paying for these things in the first place. And I think that will eventually, well, it's already led us into trouble, I believe.
And in the past, performers were also composers, or many of them, or at least arrangers. And these people, they know their instrument more than anyone else. And it's sort of been a tragedy that that's sort of been lost. There are obviously people still doing that, but the great violinists, Paganini, Wieniawski, Isai, etc. They all wrote substantial bodies of music that they played themselves, and that's I kind of feel that's slightly different to what you were describing about sort of being away for 6 months, so that they were on tour. So there could be, I don't know, other sort of ways of doing things.
Oh, definitely. Well, being a performer / composer was the normal thing. And in addition to that, composers were expected to have a wide range of professional skills and be able to perform and arrange and write very quickly if necessary, and write according to the needs of a specific context. And I think part of the problem is that things have become so utterly abstracted and removed from any kind of, I don't like the word utility exactly, because that has connotations that I don't really like in an artistic context. But let's say the context has been stripped away. We just have these abstract pieces that might be interesting or striking to listen to, but we don't know why we're listening to them. And I don't find that to be a particularly healthy or optimal situation. But as you say, I'm optimistic actually, because I think that we're in the midst of a profound period of transformation, and I suspect that the old way of doing things is actually falling away under our feet. And
one of the really huge problems about composition and study composition is the lack of recordings of your music, or an interest in that being an important thing to do. And if there were fewer performances possibly, and more recordings, that could be a good kind of good thing, perhaps.
Well, it's absolutely indispensable.
Good performances, good record. But when you're in the recording studio, you can do things multiple times, and if you edit it sensibly, you can get what the composer was hoping for, which they may have not got in a performance. And then people think the music's really bad because it was badly played.
Well, that's a huge endemic problem in the composition world. Most pieces are played once and they're played badly. And so, and for the composer, that's a problem too, because if you only have one recording of your piece and it sounds terrible, it's hard for you to tell if it's the piece that's the problem or if it's just been badly played. And then, of course, for the audience who has no clue either way, they just hear, a not very satisfying musical experience, and that's it. So, no, I think composers have the obligation to be extremely sensitive to the quality of recordings that they're producing. It's very, very important.
Could you talk about the recording of your album? How did you go about that?
Oh, well, that's my fourth monographic portrait CD. So, and I've been doing this for a while.
Was it similar to the other ones then? Similar process?
I suppose it's similar, but what I would say is that having now done this for, 15, 20 years, I've become much more skilled and sensitive with respect to the recording process. And I have a much better understanding of how that works and what the potential pitfalls are. And there's a few things that have happened. One is that I when I'm writing, when I'm composing, I'm thinking much more today in terms of the recorded medium, in terms of the microphone, in terms of what it will sound like when it's recorded, because in all likelihood, that's how most people are going to hear it. The number of people that will actually hear a live performance of one of my pieces is tiny compared to the number that will hear the finished recording. So that's one thing. And the second thing is I've realized over the years that the last place in the world where you want to make any form of concession, doesn't matter if it's financial or time-wise or whatever, is recordings. You have to throw absolutely everything you have at them. And if that means that they're enormously expensive to produce and it takes 3 years to set up, then I do that. And I find a way to finance it. But you cannot cut corners with recordings because they will haunt you for the rest of your life if there's something there that has not been done properly.
Yeah, there's this one bit in the Blackwood, so no one's going to notice this, but the score that I had was photocopied. And there was this bit where the violinist said to me, because I didn't actually go to Budapest. This was all done remotely via Zoom. And he said, should this bit be tied? Because, it was tied earlier. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to check the score. Look at the score. It's not there. And it actually should have been tied because there'd been some issue with the photocopying. But I just wanted to be really faithful to the score. But so that's there forever. But I don't think anyone's going to notice it, hopefully.
Those sorts of things always find their way into the recording. There's no way to safeguard yourself completely against those kinds of mistakes.
How much session time was there for your recordings of the album? How many hours did you spend in the studio with the musicians?
So we spent a week at the studios of Swiss Radio in Zurich, a solid week in what I can only describe as luxurious conditions. We had the best sound engineer in Switzerland to oversee the recordings. He's also a very fine producer, and he knew the scores very well, so that was a huge help. And I was working with an ensemble that I've been working with for over 10 years. They knew the pieces very well. They'd performed all of them previously, some of them multiple times. The performers were also all friends of mine. We know each other very well. They know my music. So increasingly, what I'm inclined to do is to focus on making recordings with people that I know well and in the best possible conditions, and to not accept any kind of concession with that. And there can't be things that are sort of left up to chance or left up to the last minute. So, in the case
Did anything go wrong? Did anything go wrong this time? Were there any stumbling blocks?
Nothing substantial, no, not really. I have to say I was very pleased with how it came out. And if there are weak points in the recording, then they're entirely due to deficiencies.
Yeah, it's your fault. Yeah.
in my own deficiencies in my own artistic sensibility.
I totally say the same for this Blackwood album. Like any issues with the performances are my fault rather than the musicians, which did an extraordinary job. They hadn't actually seen the music before, so the album's about 43, 44 minutes long, but you have to record every single part in isolation. So there's actually 5.25 hours of music that needed to be recorded and then overlaid. So there just wasn't enough time to do. So, for example, some of the very simple string lines, we'd do 2 or 3 takes, and then that would be enough, and then we'd move on.
Right.
Yeah.
But
did you think did the performance sound good to you on the CD, on the Blackwood CD?
Yes, absolutely. It sounds very good. It's also remarkably well engineered, and I think that that's another area where composers, I think, should pay attention to the popular music world, because if a recording is superbly well recorded, if the sound engineering, the sound quality is properly attended to, it makes it so much more engaging. It's such an important thing. You were mentioning earlier the importance of having a more collaborative role, and that this is something that isn't really talked about very much in the composition world, where we approach composers as sort of independent figures who don't collaborate really. And one thing I'm curious about is, obviously you're from a musical family. Do you think that growing up in the way that you did, with a brother who's also a musician, a very successful musician, do you think that made you more amenable to the notion of collaboration? And did you and your brother play together when you were growing up?
No, because he was sort of pursuing the pop part. A tiny bit. There will be examples of us playing together, but not in the way you probably imagine. And I wasn't very interested in pop music then, and he wasn't that interested in classical music. He likes music with lyrics. So if something doesn't have lyrics, it's hard for him to appreciate it. But certainly later on, he collaborates with everyone, and I've collaborated. I've done arrangements for him, and I know because I know him so well. I know exactly, I guess, what not to do as well as what to do, and there's never been any friction at all. Normally, you send something and then that's it. Whilst with everyone else, you're having to redo things the whole time. So it's quite refreshing. So, for example, he doesn't like really high strings, so you just don't do that. But yeah, he's a really he's a really extraordinary collaborator himself. No, I'm nowhere near that sort of level, but there's a lot to be learnt from him, I guess. This is Ed Sheeran for anyone that's doesn't understand.
So what are the qualities that makes someone an extraordinary collaborator in your view? Is it something to do with musical ability, or is it more psychological in its nature?
From what I've picked up, well, my brother will just. I do this as well. He finishes things and he does things quickly, and if they're bad, they're bad, and he just does another one and another one and another one, and he does so many that. There'll be some. It's like Vivaldi or whoever. It's that sort of level of productivity. I mean, like 10 songs a day, type sort of craziness. Like no one would ever believe it. But I've sent him, a background track or something to write something to, and then 15 minutes later, the entire song comes back, and that's it. It takes him that long to finish something.
That is remarkable. I mean, that's a question of temperament, though. There are people who work very slowly, and
I work slowly personally.
Right.
If I can. But if you're forced to work quickly, you just have to accept whatever idea you have and then go with it, because you don't have that luxury to say, oh, this is not good enough. You just have to go with that, and the more you do that, the better that idea will be in future, perhaps. The more sort of intuitive it will become.
Right, absolutely, yeah. No, I know you've done arranging for him. You did the Perfect piece with Andrea Bocelli, which is a beautiful arrangement. It's remarkable to me that there would not have been some degree of overlapping of your musical interests in childhood. Was there not a point at which...
There was a tiny bit. We used to listen to... My parents would... we used to listen to a lot of music in the car, because we used to live in Yorkshire, and there were long journeys down to London or to Suffolk to visit my grandparents. So we'd have music on the whole time. And what was interesting is that the pieces of music that he really liked and that influenced him were the ones I didn't like. And then the ones I liked were the ones he wasn't particularly influenced at. So we listened to a lot of Kate Bush, for example, in Yorkshire, Wuthering Heights, and I really loved that. And then he preferred Elton John, etc. So it's strange. It's strange that we got different things out of it. Not sure which ones we agree. But I think we both like the Beatles. Well, that might be the only one.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, Kate Bush is an easy one because she's such a genius. It's hard not to be impressed by what she's done.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, I did some arrangements of some of her songs earlier this year. I did not Wuthering Heights. Did Cloud Busting and Running Up That Hill. So really got to know the music quite well. Really, really great stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Matthew, what we could perhaps do is put the if you're able to obtain the permission, we'll put the recording of the, or at least an excerpt of the solo violin piece in the podcast. And is there anything else that you would like to feature? We can possibly have an excerpt of the Easley Blackwood album, although there might be a rights issue with that.
We can ask ZD. I think they're quite good with that sort of thing, because we'll be promoting it, so I'm sure they'll allow that. But I'll get permission for sure. I guess we could have the harp piece, which is in 7-tone equal temperament, but probably the Blackwood's more important if possible. I can get on that soon.
Okay, and what is the release date of the album?
They're hoping that it's the 22nd of January, which is the date that Blackwood died. But I think Naxos like to release things. They're the distributor. They like to release things on Friday, so it's either that or it's the 19th. So I don't think it's been confirmed yet. But I'll let you know. So yeah, we released this after the release date, obviously.
Yes, absolutely, and we'll put a link in the YouTube video for anyone who wants to hear the recording. I think it's a fascinating album. The process by which it was made is equally interesting, and it was it was a pleasure to be able to speak with you and dive into the details of how you made this happen. So thank you for that.
Oh, I really appreciate you asking me to do this. It was very unexpected, really, really great, and I love your channel and all your videos and interviews, and I wish there were more people like you doing what you're doing. So hopefully there will be one day.
There will be. I don't think we'll be waiting long.
That's good. That's good.
There will be someone who leaps onto the scene and does it 100 times better than me, and that will
and then that's the end of you.
yeah, exactly. Well, okay. Thank you again.
Thank you, Samuel. Have a great Christmas.
My newest album, In Glow of Like Seclusion, is finally here after years of hard work from many talented people I'm proud to call collaborators. And I'd like to take this chance to express my profound gratitude to the many people who helped make this project a reality. You'll find their names listed here. And if you'd like to order your own copy, you'll find a link in the description of the video or podcast. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.